The research program, which systematically identified the biases people have when making decisions, was started by two psychologists in Israel named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. After decades of research, these two guys completely changed the way psychology and economics looks at human behavior. They changed how we think about thinking. In 2002, Daniel Kahneman was given the Nobel Prize in Economics for these insights, but sadly, Amos Tversky died in the 1990s from cancer, and the Nobel is never awarded posthumously. By conducting clever experiments, Kahneman and Tversky were able to uncover some of the systematic ways in which people make decisions and then assemble a theory which explains them. First, people are loss averse, meaning that we prefer avoiding a loss to acquiring a gain. People are generally willing to do more to avoid losing $100 than they are to earning an additional $100. This is one of the irrationalities that Kahneman and Tversky identified through their research. Second, people are reference dependent, meaning that their decisions can be influenced if something is presented as a loss or a gain. We saw this in the previous video with framing effects. Third, people overweight small probabilities and underweight large probabilities. If something has a 10% chance of happening, people tend to make decisions as if that probability were 0%. And if something has a 90% chance of happening, they tend to make decisions as if it was a sure thing. And fourth, there's diminishing sensitivity to gains and losses, meaning that the marginal utility of gains or losses is diminishing as they get larger. If you take a look at this graph, you can see these principles in action. We can see that gaining 5 cents gives us 17 or 18 units of value or utility, but losing 5 cents reduces our utility by 40, a much bigger amount. That exemplifies loss aversion, since the disutility of a loss is much bigger than the utility of a gain. But it also shows that our utility depends on whether this is framed as a gain or a loss. And as we increase the gains or losses, the value function flattens out. We become less sensitive to it. Here's an example of how we all have diminishing sensitivity to gains or losses. Imagine you go to a store to buy a nice pen. The pen costs $15. But when you bring it up to the register, the cashier says, "Hey, I'm not really supposed to do this, but the shop 3 doors down is selling this exact same pen for $8. So you might want to buy it there instead." Would you thank the cashier and go to the other store? Or would you shrug it off and pay almost double for this pen? Most people respond that they would go to the other store to save the money. Okay, well, now imagine you're at a store and you want to buy a really nice camera. This camera costs $1,015. But when you bring it up to the register, the cashier tells you that 3 doors down, they're selling the camera for $1,008. Would you go to the other store then? Most say no. They would just pay the $1,015 since saving $7 on that price just isn't that much. But this is totally irrational. In both cases, the marginal cost of going to the other store is walking 3 doors down. And in both cases, the marginal benefit is saving $7. But people aren't really thinking on the margin. They're reference dependent and they have diminishing sensitivity. Keep this in mind when you go to buy a house or a car, where salespeople will know how insensitive you are to very large changes in the price because they're small relative to the total price. Why are we like this? Why do we make systematic mistakes like this? In economics, we assume that people behave rationally, but behavioral economics shows us that it is a bounded rationality with limits. Daniel Kahneman offers this explanation. We have two systems or modes of thinking. System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, frequent, emotional, stereotypic, and subconscious. System 1 is filled with our heuristics, our rules of thumb, which means that it often gets decisions right, but misses things on the edges and behaves poorly in unusual circumstances. But it's really cheap to run System 1. System 1 doesn't even feel like thinking. The odds are good that you're using System 1 right now to watch this video, just trying to catch important parts for quizzes and stuff. System 2 is slow, effortful, infrequent, logical in its calculation, and conscious. System 2 requires you to focus your whole mind on the problem, and it's expensive in terms of effort and energy, so we don't use it very much. But System 2 is what allows us to recognize those visual illusions and to see that it's illogical to go to the other store for the pen but not for the camera. Honestly, my guess is that for most of you, you use System 1 when you take the quizzes and exams for this class, but really, you should use System 2. System 1 isn't bad, though. System 1 is our brains economizing on resources and finding shortcuts in cognition that still reach the right answer most of the time. But this framework helps us see why we have so many cognitive biases and helps us figure out what we can do about them.